was with Rocky since the beginning. What was it like working with him? Fucking incredible. Man, I'd never seen a motherfucker take off like that. Harun is my first name in Arabic. It's Aaron Chace Johnson. I was born in 1974 at Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood, California. I was raised in the San Fernando Valley. I went to 4 different high schools, but I graduated from Canoga. I had lots of interest growing up, man. I started rapping at a very young age, and I played basketball from the ages of 9 years old, year round. It's part of the reason why I went to school in the Valley. I was in several different basketball programs. I never really made a conscious decision between basketball and music. I think, if you're not exceptionally gifted physically or just, at some point you start to realize that you probably aren't going to be a professional athlete. So music was something I did regardless. Well, my musical journey started with hip hop music. Like I said, I was born in 1974, and so I kind of aged and became an adolescent, young adult at the time hip hop was developing as a art form and as an industry. I've been working actively in the music industry since I was 14. There was a program called Yes to Jobs that took kids in the inner city and gave us jobs between the ages of 14 and 18, paid internships in the summer. Yes to Jobs means Youth Entertainment Summers. It was a program that was started by the former owners of A&M Records. My best friend's mom, Jaleesa Hazard, was the director of the program. She put me in the program and I started working at record labels at 14. My first job was at Warner Electra Atlantic. It was a distribution company for Warner Electra and Atlantic. As an intern in the music industry where I started, it was they kind of had you going from department to department. And I did everything from college radio promotions, and back then we used to do something called fax campaigns. So you would make flyers and send out faxes to all the college radio stations. I did marketing, I did everything. So I worked for every department in separate days. So they would break up your internship with different departments on every day. So I work with everybody, man. Every aspect from the packing and shipping in the warehouse to promotions, marketing, and A&R. Yeah, that's the thing. It was summer paid internships, so it kind of gave us a leg up on getting jobs. So I want to say my first actual job was probably with Giant Records. Giant Records was owned by a really, really famous manager and music industry executive. Yeah, my first job was at Giant. I worked, at first I started kind of in the mailroom, but then I worked in the A&R department with Cassandra Mills. Dave Jacobson was there at the time. Yeah, that was probably my first real job. Man, you're making me think. Yeah, so sometimes 37 years ago. So I'm thinking my second job might not have really been till after I came back from school. I went to school in Atlanta. I went to college. I went to Morris Brown in Atlanta. So my first real job after that was Capital EMI Special Markets, which is the catalog division of Capital EMI. I worked with a bunch of artists, but it was unique because I worked with, a catalog label was labels that take existing releases and kind of repackage them. So, that's where I learned a lot about where the money was really made in the music industry, being catalog. People like the owners of South Soul Records, Philly International, Solar Records, which is owned by Dick Griffey here in Los Angeles. We actually acquired their catalogs and repackaged all their releases for retail. So did compilations and stuff like that. So it kind of gave me an idea about, how money was made in the music industry, like where the actual real money is. There's a lot of money in upfront releases or artists that are signed to the label, new releases, but the Capitol building was bought off the back of artists like Nat King Cole and, you know, Frank Sinatra, stuff like that. And these guys at the time I was working there were already deceased. So, you know, they make lots of money off of catalog. So Capitol EMI was probably the first place I really learned that. Now this is music. All those are the product of the distribution company taking masters or songs that they own and placing them on a compilation. Exactly. So when you own the rights to a composition or a record, you can actually exploit it in the way that you want to. You can have remixes done, remakes, you can repackage it, you could do extended versions or remixes and stuff like that. That's why the ownership of music is so important. And I probably learned that the most. There was a guy who ran Capitol EMI Music. His name was Eli Okun. He was a pretty well-known executive back in the day. He ran the catalog division, and you know, every year they kind of publish what each individual division of EMI and Capitol made, and I realized every year he was probably, if not the top earning division, one of the top earning divisions. And at the time, you know, Capitol EMI had huge artists and a bunch of different distributed labels, but most of the money came from catalog. And like I said, it was a valuable lesson just in terms of like ownership and, you know, like where the money actually is besides publishing. But publishing and catalog kind of go hand in hand. So it was just an education and learning where the music comes from, I mean, where the money comes from. And that's was probably the industry education. I'd already been doing music and into the music, but then realizing what the industry of music is, I probably learned that the most working at Capitol EMI. Shout out to Tom Cartwright, my man Charles Levan. It was a label called The Right Stuff that did, we just acquired a bunch of catalogs, did slow jams, compilations, and just all type of, and then you get creative too, because when you don't have an artist that's in the studio making an album, you gotta take songs from the catalog in order to create like an interesting project, like a project of slow jams or, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, so it became like there was a real it was like college for the music industry. I'm a manager currently, right? Like I've been working in the music industry 37 years, and I've been a manager probably for the last 17, 18 years, like as, you know, manager. And it definitely helped inform how I consult clients that I have now, knowing the value of ownership and masters and how catalog can be exploited years and years after you're gone and feed your children and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, all those lessons still apply for sure. And then in some ways, because we had to take songs and put them in a sequence for a compilation, that probably helps inform how I work with artists sequencing their albums. I can't remember all these. I've worked for every major label, almost every major distributor. To be honest with you, it's just the truth. I've worked for everybody. And where I went after Capitol EMI was probably had a brief stint at an independent label. Then I worked for Priority. Priority was the preeminent West Coast gangster rap label. You know, a guy named Brian Turner, who was originally from Canada and used to be a part of another catalog company called, I think it was Razor and Tie, I believe. Brian was from, he made a lot of his money off the California Raisins. You remember that commercial? It was like an 80s commercial. He had the California Raisins redo I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which I believe was a Temptation song, so he had them redo that for a campaign for actual California Raisins. And he made a lot of money off that, and he started Priority Records. Priority Records went on to be, like I said, probably the most preeminent and legendary West Coast gangster rap label. Everybody from NWA and, I mean, Snoop Dogg, Mack 10, Ice Cube, Master P, and all of his stuff, because people forget Master P's from Louisiana, but he came to prominence in the music industry because he was living in Richmond, California, at a record store, and started No Limit Records in Richmond, California. So he was distributed through Priority, and then later on they had people like the Duck Down Records group, which is Black Moon and Helter Skelter, Smith and Wesson, and then we had Raucous, which was Yasin Bey or Mos Def formerly, Talib Kweli, Pharoah Monch, all these. So it's like it was probably, it's known as the most important, one of the most important hip hop or gangster rap labels, but from hip hop just in general, like Priority was a very, very, very important label. And I started there doing sales. I was a West Coast regional salesman for Priority Records. I was an artist in a group called Self Scientific still at the time. We were putting out our own records independently, but then I was doing sales for Priority. So all the record stores, mom and pop, major mom and pop chains. Mom and pop is the kind of the colloquial term for independent record stores. But back then we had independent stores that were sort of small chains. So I did small chain stores in Los Angeles, Denver, Las Vegas, and and I think maybe Utah. So I was the West Coast regional salesman, handled independent small chain stores, and I handled Virgin and all the Tower records. So I got to know, I put out my own records. I was an artist and put out my own records independently, but then also was the West Coast regional salesman for a pretty big record company. So that helped me get our records sold because, while I wasn't talking about Ice Cube or somebody like that, I was like, selling my shit too. So, well, we didn't want to sign to Priority. I think at one point they probably would have. But because of my experience working at places like Capital EMI Music, remember I told you that kind of like the ownership of your masters or the ownership of your music, like that was really important to us. It's something that we learned early. So it's not that I couldn't have signed with a label. At one point we did do had a brief deal with Loud Records, which was owned by Steve Rifkin. He did Wu-Tang and Mobb Deep, and so we signed for a minute with Loud Records, but it wasn't something that I think, it just wasn't our course. Like we were independent artists, made our own vinyl, printed up our own CDs, like we did everything from top to bottom on our own, and had some reasonable success. Yeah, of course. We saw Magic Disc, VIP, Baseline, which is, me and Absol talk about that all the time. Absol's family, Absol's related to the owners of VIP and Baseline, I believe. Or Magic Disc, one or two. And Magic Disc, yeah, that's Absol's family. So we've talked, when me and Ab first met, we would actually talk about that. Like, so yeah, for sure. Kelvin Anderson and that whole family, man, like for sure. I sold to them and a guy named Royce Fortune, who owned Fortune Records right here on Crenshaw. He had one in Inglewood, but in Crenshaw as well. So all the independent record stores and record store owners and record pool owners and all that stuff. Like I've been knowing those guys since I was like, young. Even before I worked at Priority, but for sure once I worked at Priority. I actually got my job at Priority. So one of the first, because you're asking where did I work, I had so many jobs. But I worked for a brief period of time at Warehouse Records, about 3 different Warehouse Records. And the person who was the buyer for Warehouse Records was a person named Violet Brown, who was like an early mentor and good friend of mine. Violet, because she was, we were so cool and she actually took a liking to me just as a young person, she actually recommended me for my job at Priority. There's a guy named Brian Shafton, who was, instrumental and pretty much the reason why I got the job at Priority. So I started doing sales. And at the time, it wasn't a lot of young black people doing sales in the record industry. We were pretty much doing marketing, promotions, or A&R. So it just wasn't a lot of young black people doing sales. So that actually gave me somewhat of an advantage because once again, I was in a part of the business that was focused on where the money is not just the creativity. I was already creative and an artist, a respected artist, but that gave me like an insight to where the money is. We hung out with all the artists at Priority. Like in the '90s, hip hop was becoming an industry. I mean, a big industry, or you know what I mean. But I think 1992 was the debut of SoundScan, and I want to say Snoop Dogg put out Doggy Style, 91 or 92, and he was one of the first albums, if not the first album, to be reported to SoundScan, and so him selling almost 1 million records in a week and stuff like that. So keep in mind, I'm working at an independent West Coast rap label at a time when all this stuff was happening, and people were making a lot of money. It was a lot of young people. So yeah, we all hung out together, man. The artists, the people who worked at the label, all those people are still people that I know to this day. So at the time, there was no streaming, there was no downloads, right? So if I tell you Snoop sold 1 million records in 1 week, and the average price of a CD wholesale was $6.99 and in retail for $10.99. I mean, fuck. 1 week, not a year. Like that's what he sold in the first week. I mean, he got to the point where, and that was just one of the artists on Priority. These guys were printing money. I mean, I remember working at Priority, so there was a guy named Steven Draft who was the CEO of Priority. And because I was doing sales, we would always have visibility on, which releases were selling. And then, you hear about, Master P, I think he was paying like 12% distribution fee. 12% meaning 12% of 100, right? He was only paying, out of 100% of the profit, he was only paying 12% as a fee to distribute his records. So Master P was making ridiculous amounts of fucking money. He's making damn near 90% of his fucking money. 88% of his money was coming to his pocket. So when you talk about the difference between then and now, like, now we have formulas that, that come up with what an actual record sale is. Before, the unit meant the actual CD being sold. And then, bro, people were making a lot of money. And it's not just people like Master P. On the lower level, you may think of Duck Down or Raucous Records as an independent or underground music, but it's had artists that were still going gold, selling 500,000 to 1 million records. And when you have people selling that much music wholesale, like it's just, yeah, man, people made a lot of money. I saw guys change their entire fucking life. There's still brothers now, and like Mack 10, Mack 10, who's my brother, and somebody that owned his own label. Like people don't nowadays. You don't talk about, when you talk about entrepreneurs from hip hop, you don't really talk about like, hear Mack's name come up that often. But I remember Mack had Who Banging Records, right? He had a joint venture with Priority, and Mack would have 11, 12 artists signed to him. And he would get an advance for all 12 artists. The beginning of the year, right? The fiscal year, which is like April. He would get an advance for all 12 artists up front. So when you just make, $4 million in a day or some shit, that's why it's like, Mack 10, if you know anybody from the West Coast, Mack 10 has always had the illest cars, always, dressed to the T, big ass houses, money, like, and he's not like a, we don't talk about Mack 10 as like one of the biggest artists, but because he was a very, very keen and smart businessman, Mack don't even have to rap. Like, you know what I mean? He made so much money during those times, man. He's just smart with his money, reinvested, does stuff. But just people like Mack 10, I saw dudes make so much money, lots of money. And Mack is just, he's smart. He's not flashy for the sake of being flashy. Obviously, he's got a affinity for nice things, but Mack is just smart. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody told me right now Mack owned half of Inglewood. You would be surprised, because he's just always been smart with how he spends and makes his money. I mean, he's an artist and he surely knows who he is, but extremely gracious dude, man. Super cool. Super cool. But that's everybody that I met. I really didn't have, I'm being honest, I really had no experiences where I'm just like, oh, this dude's an asshole. Like, maybe it's the way I carry myself as well. I've heard other people say shit about certain artists, but I've never really experienced that, man. And I don't be getting too close either. Like, you know what I mean? So I really, everybody that I work with at Priority or anywhere, it's like, it's been nothing but a mutual love and respect and exchange, that's rooted in peace. I don't really have too many. I know some executives I could talk shit about though. Some of these dudes, but yeah. But I've always been closer to the artists. People don't know Mack 10 is probably one of the biggest concert promoters right now. He does old school concerts, and he's an underwriter or promoter for a lot of some of these concerts that you see happening. And people probably wouldn't know that. He's not going around doing a bunch of articles and shit about it, but he still has a huge impact and makes a lot of money working in the music industry without having to actually do music. But that's why, because he's smart. He's never, he knows how to put teams together. He's very resourceful, and he's a smart dude, man. Mack is super smart. Why did I leave Priority? I got another job. I don't know exactly why. I don't think I got fired. I think it was after they got bought. That's what it was. So Priority was acquired by EMI. They bought 50% while I was working there. Then they bought another 49% or some ridiculous shit. And we all folded into Capital. So most of the time in the music industry or any company, when you get acquired, they have, anytime you have an acquisition, they have layoffs in an effort to cut the fat, So I wasn't making a crazy amount of money at Priority, but I was an executive in sales, and then I went into marketing and product management. But at the time when we got folded into Capitol Records, they had other people at Capitol that were probably getting paid just as much or probably a little bit less than I was getting. So I got laid off at Priority, and then had a couple odd jobs in between, just doing some independent stuff. And then I met a guy named Jim Swindell and Mark Geiger. Mark Geiger was the guy who started Lollapalooza and Snowcore and stuff like that. He started a label called Artist Direct. Artist Direct was one of the first, they're a very technology-forward company, and they had the biggest database of musical artists and stuff like that when the internet was becoming a thing. At the time, it was called new media. The internet was referred to as new media, and we were just trying to figure out how the new monetization model for the music industry was being established via the internet, and Artist Direct was kind of on the forefront of the integration of technology and music. So I actually went to work for a guy named Jim Swindell at Artist Direct, and it was director of marketing at Artist Direct. So that was a whole another experience. And it kind of taught me, at the time it put me in a position where I was at a company that was very technology forward when technology was still kind of being frowned on in the music industry. And I was just, director of marketing for a company that was a leader in technology in the music industry. So, we were doing things that nobody else in the music industry was doing because they were so invested into technology, the integration of technology and music. So that was a really dope experience. Like I said, it was the early stages of the integration of technology and music, and the internet was obviously the conduit to accelerate the integration of technology and music. So we had, for instance, a service before iTunes was put out. This is 2000, 2001, right? Before Apple Music or iTunes had even launched. We had something called iMusic, which was an independent label that took artists that had 10,000 sales or more and gave them distribution deals. And then there was an inner office program called Jukebox that you can make playlists and shit like that. They would put songs into a bank. Everybody had this application on their computer. You can make playlists. This is before Spotify. This is before iTunes or anything. And to this day, I don't even know if it's true or not. I'd have to ask Mark Geiger, but I think Apple bought the name iMusic from from Artist Direct. So it wasn't just it was like I was kind of on the forefront working at Artist Direct of the development of the internet as it relates to music. My daughter was born in 2001. I think I left Artist Direct. I don't even know exactly why. Yeah, bro, I swear to God, this is crazy because I can't remember exactly why. I don't think I got fired though. I think I got laid off. No, I got laid off again. Artist Direct was acquired. That's the first time I actually received severance pay because as an executive at Artist Direct, I had a contract, a 3-year contract, and they had to basically give me a buyout on the last year of my contract, and I received severance because they got acquired or sold off a large part of the company as well. I bought a Denali, a Tahoe, a burgundy Denali Tahoe. I probably invested in Self-Scientific a little bit, you know, making some vinyl and shit like that, and did a bunch of traveling. Yeah. But yeah, just set up some stuff, took a chance on some entrepreneurial shit, got it going. And then, you know, at the time, me and DJ Muggs were actually really good. It's one of my good friends. And I think we were talking about starting a label, and eventually DJ Muggs and I started a label called Angelus Records. So that's right on the heels of me working at Artist Direct. Me and Muggs started Angelus Records and put out Self-Scientific, DJ Muggs and the Jizza, Mitchie Slick, a bunch of different albums. So the sneaker snores were right around the time we started Angelus Records. So my good friend Jerry Main, who was a promoter for all that, remember Legends? Jerry Main, no, he didn't do a magazine. He was a promoter. All the Asian clubs that used to happen in like the Palace and all that shit, like the Killer Asian Nights and shit like that. My boy Jerry was a party promoter, a club promoter. We met, became super cool. Me and DJ Muggs had gotten some money from advances on some of the stuff we did with Angelus Records because we had a distribution deal through Universal Music. Long story short, we took, you know, some money and invested in a store called Gray One. DJ Muggs, myself, and Jerry became really, really cool, and we invested in a sneaker store in Pasadena called Gray One. Eventually, it had 2 locations, but yeah, super dope sneaker store. One of the first Tier 0 sneaker accounts in Los Angeles. I think only us and Undefeated at the time were like Tier 0 Nike accounts. It wasn't really a hole in the market. Once again, it was like the ground floor for that. So the developing sneaker industry, like, you know, obviously people were into sneakers and, you know, but this is a time when you started to see like Soul Collector magazine and media and all this shit dedicated towards the idea of collecting sneakers. I collected sneakers forever. At one point, you know, I had 400 or 500 pairs of sneakers. I've always just been into clothes and sneakers, and that's part of the reason why we bought into Gray One, because there's this whole developing industry, and, you know, just kind of went from, you know, my experience in the music industry always took me to Magic, the Magic Show in Vegas every year, because we always had an artist that was doing the activation for Echo clothing or something shit like that. So I got really close to owners and people that were making clothes and saw how much money the industry was making, but also it gave me an idea, it gave me the ability to see how clothing labels rely heavily on music for amplification. So, you know, you always got some artist that's coming to perform at your booth or trying to get clothes on this artist and shit like that. So I was kind of on the ground floor of that whole phenomenon. Like, you know, with brands like Echo and then LRG and stuff like that. So whether it be Jonas or Mark Echo, like, I got to know some of these guys just from being executive in the music industry or having an artist that they wanted to work with. And so it kind of, you know, led me in that direction. I was already somebody who collected sneakers, and it just seemed like smart business to buy into a sneaker company that had, or sneaker boutique that was on the ground floor of that whole developing phenomenon. Because it's always been synonymous with the genre itself. You know, whether when I say Run DMC, you're gonna think of sweatsuits and Adidas, and you know, if I say, you know, and for anybody, right, there's always a look, an aesthetic, and a style of clothing that goes with the artist. It's probably, you know, one of the unspoken elements of hip hop is style or dress, you know, how you dress. So it's just kind of always been synonymous, you know, with hip hop, and hip hop is because the emphasis is so much on rhyming. I think it has a different, and you know, and in conjunction with the syncopation of the beats and shit, I think it just has a different effect on the psyche than other forms of music. And you know, it's a lifestyle probably first, right, before it became a commodity as music. So you know, clothing, sneakers, shit like that has always been associated with hip hop. It's always been a really good conduit to sell it too, because it's so much a part of, it's authentically a part of the lifestyle. You can tell what a motherfucker's about by like, or probably not so much now, but in the era that I came up in, you can really tell a lot about people based upon the brands and how they wore their clothes. I think certain brands have an ethos, a DNA. There's intrinsic things about clothing brands that's translated in the way the clothes are made, and then how they're merchandised, how people wear them. So it's not a judgment, right? But if you knew a guy that wore flight jackets and Doc Martens all the time, he probably was, you know, listening to ska music and had skinhead friends. Like, you know what I mean? So I used to do sales for a company called Prohibit. Prohibit was a company started by Maki Noguchi from Japan. I started going to Japan when I was in 1996 or 94 maybe. We started going to Japan, and really we went there as artists. So Scientific would get booked out there because we had a pretty good international audience. We sold records to Cisco Records and places like that. In Japan, the vinyl market's really big, so we always saw a lot of vinyl out there. And we started going out there as artists. And so Maki Noguchi, she started Prohibit. And Prohibit was a Japanese denim brand. Once again, I'm at the forefront of the developing premium denim market. So a guy named Damon Green, who's my good friend, Peter Mintz, and Maki Noguchi. Peter and Damien hired me to do West Coast sales for Prohibit and Red Monkey. Red Monkey was a highly sought after premium denim brand. Prohibit was as well. Maki had North American licensees. And long story short, I used to do sales for them. When she opened a store in New York, she asked me to come to New York if I would work with her and her brand out there. And we ended up taking over Prohibit NYC, me and my partner Shin Nishigaki, for the North American operations. And I had a store in the Lower East Side at 152 Allen Street called Prohibit NYC, which specialized in Japanese selvage denim, 5-pocket, left-hand chain stitch, indigo, premium denim. But we made more than just denim. But at the time, you know, it's A-Life's around the corner, Reed Space is literally next door. You know, it's just, I'm in the epicenter of the developing premium denim brands. I always had a huge affinity for New York, obviously being a hip hop fan, and what we were into just as individuals, me and Khalil, like we just always loved New York. So I moved to New York and did the Prohibit thing, was living in Brooklyn. At the time, I'm still somewhat of an artist, utilizing my contacts in the hip hop community to do mixtape release parties and, you know, all types of shit at the store. So it became like this hub for, you know, all types of hip hop artists, and culturally just became a place people came. Yeah, and that's why I met A$AP Rocky and A$AP Yams and Nas and Bari and the whole A$AP crew. They used to come to my shop all the time for parties and shit like that, and we just developed like this older dude, younger dude's relationship. You know, like it's the big homie, you know, that type shit. Cause they come to my shop and see like fucking Mos Def or Jay Electronica or Black Thought just kind of hanging out. Dave Chappelle smoking weed in the basement. They'd be like, "Who the fuck is this dude?" So I mean, I got to know all of them from my store, and in New York, they was just young, doing their fucking thing. They just always, all those guys were really into fashion though. They did music and shit like that, but and he had urban fashion with Fat Farm and all that stuff, and then you had skate and surf. Which really wasn't called streetwear. So when the urban market began to fall out a little bit and the skate and surf market began to rise, somewhere in the intersection of that, the fallout of urban and the rise of skate and surf, we get streetwear, which is why it's so heavily influenced by skateboarding and all the cultures around, extreme sports. And then, but it's partly like some urban fashion, like LRG and Echo and shit like that. So streetwear to me is the intersection of the skate and surf market and what we used to call urban fashion. So at this time, that shit was, streetwear was becoming a whole thing, and all the ASAP guys were heavily into like streetwear shit. I mean, obviously Rocky had a real star quality about him. He had all the girls. Everybody was like, always kind of flocking around him. But all the ASAP guys, they're just unique, man. They just reminded me like a younger, much different version of what Dipset was. Like, what I'm saying? They just all were together and had secret handshakes, and, they all knew each other from growing up. And, so obviously I saw something. Did I see them becoming superstars? Maybe not until I started working with Rocky and hearing the music. But, yeah, they definitely had some redeemable qualities that you saw right away. Yams was special. Yams was a special, special dude. Just in terms of how he saw culture, and he was so informed. So everything he did was so calculated and sort of bringing shit together. His approach to culture was he was just informed. He was a person that studied things before him. And he knew how to translate the nuances of things before him in a modern and refreshing way. So it's one thing it's a difference between paying homage and copying something. He just paid homage to shit. He wasn't like a copycat dude. He didn't do things like on the nose. Like he would take bits and pieces from shit in the past, and if you recognize that, then you were able to see that he was like, this shit was calculated. It wasn't just some happenstance. He was doing shit because he was informed by something in the past. Yeah, that's special. But New York motherfuckers be like that though. For some reason, I don't know if it's the landscape. They drive a little bit less. Like people in New York collect shit. Like, they collect shit, and you go to dude's house, there'd be posters and shit all over the fucking place, and like, this is from this concert and shit like that. Like, and growing up on the West, I didn't know a lot of people like that, like growing up. Like most of the people I knew like that were from the East Coast. Yams was just one of those people, Yeah, I started working with Rocky 2009, 10, whatever, somewhere around there. At first, we were just doing marketing for him. I formed a company with my boy. Hip hop, we had started this company called Agency 78. Hip hop and Hawaii Mike. We were doing like, marketing initiatives and shit with Vice magazine and all that type of stuff. So we wanted to just really make money off of hooking Rocky up with brands, because everybody wanted to do shit with him. And then Yams, at one point, Yams was like, yo, I need you to come work with us. 9 years. Oh yeah, I was with Rocky since the beginning. Man, I'd never seen a motherfucker take off like that. I've been working in the music industry already a long time. I'd never seen a person take off that fast. By the time you saw Rocky's video, it was just like, I don't know. He was a superstar instantly. And I had never seen no shit like that. And then, as long as I've been working in the music industry, I'd done a lot of shit, but the level of access, once I started working with Rocky, was totally fucking different. Totally different. The entire world opened up. Like, all my interests seemed to collide at once. Like, it seemed like everything that I had done in my career was almost in preparation for working with Rocky. So all the fashion contacts, or the time I spent working with streetwear and fashion companies to all the record industry experience, all that shit kind of converged in one fucking person. Because Rocky was like, you know, at the forefront of all that shit. I used to always talk shit. Like, if you kick it with me, like, you know, I'm halfway funny, but I'm direct as fuck. Just about a bunch of shit. So I used to be like, man, y'all, you know, y'all niggas got to do this. Y'all got to stop fighting one another. Y'all tripping over bitches and, you know, shit like this. I was always, anytime they were in my presence at the shop, I would just be talking shit. But really not talking shit, just on some, because what I've been through, just, you know, I've seen this shit before. So I used to always just talk shit to him. One day, Yams was like, we at the studio, come fuck with us. He was like, I need you to come talk your old head shit. He was like, I need you to come here and talk this shit like you be talking to his old head. So I was like, cool, I'll come up there. At the time, I was still smoking weed. I went up there, smoked a bunch of weed. Yams was like, I need you to go in the booth and talk shit on here. Yams and Rocky, they was both like, yeah, just talk. I was like, what y'all want me to say? He was like, man, just talk shit like you be talking shit to us any fucking way. So that was it. That literally was it. I did that shit in like one take. You get what you negotiate, not what you deserve. If you could get rich off of what you deserve, it'd be a lot of people in a lot better positions, right? Like, the truth is, like, and I'm not a person that does a lot of interviews or be taking credit for shit or, you know, be like, oh, you know I did that, right? But, you know, if I have any regrets, and I really don't, but if I were to do things different, it would be that. Because in the music industry, everything is about perception. In life, a lot of things are about perception. And if people don't know, then their perception of you is not complete. So if you're not able to get in front of the things that you did, that's why, you know, it's funny, but, you know, motherfucker like Soulja Boy be like, I was the first, and I know where that comes from. It's not that he wants to brag or beat a nigga. Like, he's like, you forget, Soulja Boy was like the first internet star. The nigga was like 14, 15 years old, doing shit that nobody had ever seen. TikTok dances, like, Soulja Boy, you. The whole song was a fucking dance. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if he doesn't say that or jump up and down about this shit, then it gets easy to forget or get a credit to somebody else. Like, especially in the music industry, man. Like, I got this shit called the DOS effects theory. Me and my partner hip hop, we got all these fucking theories. One of them is like, my whole shit is the DOS effects theory. You remember DOS effects? You don't remember DOS effects is. You niggas know what DOS effects is. They had get the riggedy biggity bow, all that shit, right? DOS effects, it has such an impact with riggedy, all that shit, right? It had motherfuckers in cartoons and all type of shit doing it, but it took a minute between their first album and their second album. By the time they got to their second album, you had a nigga like Ice Cube saying, chickadee, check yourself before you ready. And he's Ice Cube. So my theory is, if somebody can do something as consistent or sometimes better than you, then motherfuckers will forget that you was the originator of that shit, and it don't matter. It'll be the motherfucker who did it just as consistent or better than you right after you that makes the bread off of it or gets the credit for it. Like, so it became, like, you know, how often do you hear people talk about DOS effects? Hardly ever now. But Ice Cube just got on tour again. Like, you feel what I'm saying? Or whoever the fuck. So it's like, you know, once you do something, you have to do it consistently good, or, you know, or at least spread the word, take credit enough so that people know that, you know, because there's nothing new under the sun. Everybody has a predecessor, but sometimes if you don't, and that becomes your leverage for negotiating. You know, when you be like, I need this much for it, they're like, well, why? Because I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did that. And I probably was a little bit more hesitant to say shit like that. It's in my career because it was so much a part of my journey to be the person on the other side of the camera or not, you know. But fuck that. You got to tell people, because that actually helps inform people how they're supposed to treat you and pay you. Yeah, so you get what you negotiate, not what you deserve. Yeah, well, I mean, Rocky's unique, man. He's a unique dude. I mean, I don't, that's something that's God-given that makes people gravitate to somebody. Some people have a different magnetic pull than other people do. I think that's what makes everybody unique. But Rocky's a special artist where he's able to take all these different genres and put them in, you know, one scope and all these artistic influences and, like, you know, very similar to Yams. That's why they work together so well. He's got a lot of different influences from a lot of different areas and eras, and they're able to express them in a very modern way, so they still feel new. Yeah, so Rocky's just a special dude, man.
He's informed.
Yeah, he's informed, and like, you know, I believe in God, so I believe a lot of that has to do with the Creator and what is being expressed through you. You know, you got to do the work, but you know, Rocky's a special motherfucker, man. That nigga ugly as a motherfucker, but he's special. Well, I worked on a lot of shit with Rocky. You know, we signed Playboi Carti and shit. You know, I made so many different projects with him. But after Rocky, I probably took a brief hiatus. I had a desire to work with artists from Africa that didn't really work out so well for me. I got to know some artists, but you know, I was really trying to figure out a way to get out of America. Yeah, so that didn't work out as well as I wanted it to. And then I got a call one day from an artist that I actually met while I was working with Rocky, a brother named Westside Gunn. Westside Gunn was basically calling me. He was like, man, I need your Rolodex. I was like, Rolodex? First of all, nigga, I don't have a fucking Rolodex no more. But he was like, no, I need, you know, I'm doing this Griselda shit. I think we want to do the shit over at Rock Nation. You know, work with us. So me and my partner, hip hop, took Westside Gunn and Benny to Jay-Z's house and ended up doing a joint venture on the management for Westside Gunn and Benny the Butcher, and working with Griselda. For the last 5-6 years, I've been working with Griselda, you know, and helping them, make them a household name. Playboi Carti happened because of Yams, Rocky, and at the time I was managing a kid named Ian Connor. They all were, you know, Ian and Playboi Carti are from Atlanta. Rocky had met Playboi Carti and stuff because Playboi Carti was signed to a label called Awful Records in Atlanta. You know, long story short, we ended up getting Carti from Awful Records and signing him to OG. He was furnished through my company, Haroon LLC, to OG, because me and Rocky were partners at OG. He's still signed to OG though. When me and Rocky stopped working together in 2019, I sold my interest in OG. I always thought Carti was special, just to be honest. You know, Carti's probably the first avant-garde trap artist. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I say that just because they're blanket terms of explaining the type of shit that he does. It really can't be explained. But, you know, he had a very interesting mix of nuances. And he was the first, like, you know, trap music, and I say that in giant air quotes, but trap music as a phenomenon is known for being really close to the street and the development of street culture. And he is that, but he's so much more than that. He's the first, like, avant-garde, or kind of, you know, there weren't any other artists that were popular. There may have been some other artists, but that were popular that kind of took the same nuances and expressed them through that. You know, Cash Carti is different from Playboi Carti, but you know, he had all these obscure references and shit that he was expressing through the lens of trap music. So it gave him a popular base, but then something else completely different. So I always thought that was special. I never saw that nigga doing the makeup and all that shit. But you know, he got to it though. But that shit works, and that's part of his character. No, Haroon, I actually started in 2010. I started Haroon as a fragrance brand. So I sold fragrance oils, direct to consumer, and through places like Union on La Brea, I sold fragrances. Then I did clothes. You know, it kind of started with these. Remember the company Goodwood? Goodwood used to make the Africa pieces. I mean, in the Jesus piece, the wooden Jesus pieces and stuff, bracelets and stuff. So I designed the Africa piece for Goodwood. That's one of my most proud claims of fame. I designed an item that became a bootleg item in New York. You go down Canal Street and shit, they sell them fucking African medallions with the kente cloth on and shit. Like that was what I designed for Goodwood. So I got 35% of the sales from that. And it really helped me at a time when I was, kind of needing the bread before me and Rocky actually really start working together. And so from that to fragrance oils to clothes and then the coffee shop. Coffee was the last thing that Harun did. Yeah, right when I moved to New York. So I want to say, got the idea for like 2008, but by 2010, Harun was a company. I'm Chace Infinite for a reason. Do all this shit. It's 24 hours in a day. That's it. And I'm passionate about this shit. I only do shit that I like. I've always been like, my friend Taryn Stevenson, who was a partner in a company called Offhand Wine Bar, he always remembers this one thing I told him before, because he asked me the same question. I was like, man, it's just like small industries. People like Richard Branson, he succeeded in starting Virgin Cola, right? Virgin Cola, you never see in America, but you go to India and certain other places, like it's the number one, or is a pretty big brand. He sought out to get 1% of what Coca-Cola was doing for the year. So you don't have to be the most successful, but if you can get a portion of industries like this fragrance, the independent fragrance industry is a huge fucking industry. And I don't have to be Le Labo, but if I can get, 3% of what Le Labo does a year, 1% of what Le Labo does a year, and it's just me, then that's successful. I think people, not just people, I think all of us have this skewed perception of what success is. So I try to approach business or things that I do from that perspective. First, I gotta like doing it, and would I do it for no money? That's the first question I ask myself. And then it's like, okay, if I'm gonna do it, then let's be realistic with the goal. It's about mixtapes down there, the rodeo, the DJ, Mexican DJ, right? Yeah. We used to buy Dr. Dre's tapes and underground, like mixtapes from down there. All the swap meets and like Slauson Swap Meet, Compton Rodeum, all these places used to make mixtapes because hip hop didn't have no real national distribution. The way you found out about shit from other regions was through mixtapes. Not in '86. I was buying it, man. '86, I was 12. And I was rapping, but I wasn't like in a group or making music like that yet. So like 87, 86, 87, 88, 89, like we was going to swap meets buying white tees and troop jackets and shit like that. Yeah. We all inconsistent, man. All of us, we men. So, we got inconsistencies. That's why we pray. You pray for guidance and forgiveness and, clarity on shit you go through, but we men, so we make mistakes, we do shit wrong, and you never really know or understand the reasons why your parents do things that they did that you feel as though may have hurt you until you have to go through something similar. Then you have this moment where you go, oh shit. If you're honest with yourself, you go, damn, I see why this nigga, oh fuck. Like, and I'm telling you, from experience, I buried both my parents. Bro, it's all over nothing. You be tripping on bullshit that you know what I'm saying? These traumas and shit, just roadblocks. Eventually they die, nigga, and you're gonna have to be the person that people call to bury this nigga and all, and take over the business and do all this shit. Then you're gonna have a moment where you go, damn, he did all this shit for us. And you're gonna feel like a piece of shit. I'm just telling you. I'm telling you from experience. It's not a judgment. That's honest to God life experience. Shit ain't worth it, dog. Have you drinking and cursing out your girl and tripping and shit? Shit ain't worth it, dog. People die. You feel what I'm saying? That's it. Everybody. Ain't none of us getting out of here alive. Man, take shit serious, but also live, bro. That's what I would tell the younger me, like, savor the experience of within living. You know what I'm saying? That's it. Savor the experience within living. Because at some point, this should be over. And all that's left is the stories that people tell about you. I've had some success doing that, but I can understand people doing things that they don't love too. So more so than that, like my advice to my younger self would be about life, not about career. And yeah, that, what I said earlier, like savor the experience that is living, like because when people ask me all the time, like, how you doing? I say, man, grateful to be here still. Man, I mean that shit. It's not just a, you know what I'm saying? I say alive and breathing all the time. Harun is my first name in Arabic. My first name is, my government name is Aaron Chace Johnson. How you say Aaron in Arabic is Harun. But the last thing was second thing was clothing line, and then the last thing was the coffee shop, which is why we sold clothing or made clothing upstairs at the coffee shop. We chose Leimert Park because Leimert Park, when I moved back from New York, um, I was living in the valley at first. My son was born, and I was looking to purchase a home, and looked in other places, and communities just didn't feel right. Leimert Park has always been a part of my life, artistically. Like we came here, used to go to Project Blow or Good Life, and there was always brown rice and barbecue parties and stuff. Like from my growing up, like we come out here and always be a part of movements and parties and stuff like that. And Leimert was just a central place for culture, art, and social political movements. It was always close to, and it was so much of Leimert was in my DNA as a person. When I found this house, man, I was just like, man, this is where I want to raise my family. This is where I want, it feels right here. It's black people, 82% black home ownership, black businesses. It just felt like important, and necessary for me just as a person. So I bought a house here in 2016. By 2018, Harun was open. I wanted to do in Leimert Park, because Leimert Park at that time was rapidly gentrifying, and I wanted to do what other companies probably were thinking about doing, but I wanted to be done by somebody who actually lived here. So I got some money, and by the grace of God, I was able to open up Harun in 2018, and we've been going strong since then. We shut down to remodel and restructure the business because now I have new partners. Community Labs, which is led by a brother named Prophet Walker, who I actually met at Harun. He's from Watts originally, but he's a developer and a really good brother. And it took a minute probably for me to open up to the possibility of having partners, but since we've done that, it's been incredible, better than I could have imagined, because I haven't really had a lot of partners, but and yeah, we're looking to open up the new spot, the remodeled Harun, January 5th probably, and really looking forward to it. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and there's been a lot of intention put into it, and yeah, I think people are going to really enjoy it. Oh, so my aunt, Claudette Marie Muhammad, was the chief of protocol for Minister Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam for many, many years, 30-some years. She probably, between her and my father, Islam was introduced to me through the lens of the Nation of Islam. But I was a really, really big fan of Malcolm X. Malcolm X's example was, in 8th grade, I read Malcolm X's autobiography, and it kind of changed me just in general, and because of Malcolm's experience as a person from Nation of Islam, having gone to Africa and the Middle East and discovering, I guess, what we call Al-Islam, I was hesitant to join the Nation of Islam, only because Malcolm's final iteration was El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, somebody who observed the 5 pillars of Islam and Orthodox or Al-Islam. So, yeah, I probably reverted in 1999 originally. And it's just, always considered myself a Muslim. And then started taking the faith more serious probably, 99, 2000. Hey, people hear you say you're Muslim and they expect you to be perfect. or more pious than most people. And there's a lot of examples of that. That's true, but that's not necessarily always true. What Islam has taught me is refinement and discipline. So when I don't know things, like I have a desire to learn, and once you learn, you try to integrate the things that you learn in a way that's at first comfortable for you, because I think that's human nature. But then, as it's prescribed by the ways and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the book Quran. So it's hard. At first, it was really really hard. Like I couldn't, because I was smoking weed, and then before I knew that smoking weed was what we consider haram or bad, I'd be smoking all fucking day and not eating. You know what I'm saying? Getting lightheaded and eating when the sun go down. I think I forget where I was with one of the brothers. It might have been like in Minnesota, somewhere you don't expect to meet Muslims. Brother was like, brother, you be smoking during Ramadan? I'm like, yeah, I am not eating. He like, you can't do that. Like, most people, you might be like, take that shit personal. Like, fuck you. Like, but that's part of the beauty of Islam. Once the brotherhood, the ummah of Islam is like, we're supposed to keep each other on point. If I see brother, if I see him tripping a little bit too much in the club, like, bro, get off that girl, bro. Like, you ain't supposed to be like that. Sometimes my brother, me and Doe, we do that all the time. I'd be like, Doe, come on, what you doing? He'll be like, come on, brother. You know what I'm saying? We do shit like that. Like, we're supposed to be reminders for each other. So I've met a lot of people who may not even been my friends that have always been someone who reminds me of the responsibility of a Muslim. Or once you take the Shahada, which is the oath of Muslims, to uphold certain shit, and they don't make you perfect. But yeah, so at first it was hard, but then it became easier once I realized that the fast is not intended to be hard. Like, what I'm saying? If you happen to eat, commit an act of charity, buy food for other people. Because the intent of the fast is to be in remembrance of people that are in need, So sometimes a charitable act will make up for the fact that you may have fucked your fast up. Right. You know what I'm saying? So once I learned that, and somebody kind of put me onto that, and it's not intended, and that doesn't mean that you just eat every day and just to be buying food all day, but there's things that actually makes the practice easier. Yeah, saved me in a lot of instances, man. Like, for sure, yeah. Like, it's hard to be, if you hold Islam close to your heart, and it's something that if you're striving to be a Muslim, it's hard to fall victim to things that aren't within the nature of Islam. You feel what I'm saying? Like, we're from Los Angeles. Like, so many things are attractive that are just detrimental to you as a person. Like, it's hard to be a gangbanger and a Muslim at the same time. It's hard to be, completely callous towards women and a Muslim at the same time. It's hard to be too invested in things that aren't inherently good and be a Muslim at the same time. Even though we may not be perfect, there's always something that tethers you, like, hey, like, you're having a little bit too much fun, brother. Maybe you might need to make salat, like,
How was adjusting to your prayers?
Oh man, it's a constant struggle. Salat's the most important part of Islam, but there's times where I'm just not able to make. We've been sitting right here, like, what I'm saying? I'm doing an interview right now, and I could have stopped, to make salat, but I do my best to just make up the prayers, when I miss them. But it's been tough, I've had the most success when I'm in places where it's catered more to it, where the society's catered more to Islam. The time I spent in Morocco, I stayed at, down the street from Al Qutbiyya, which is the major mosque in the middle of Marrakesh. I was like, man, if I lived in Morocco, I would never miss Salat. And that's not an excuse. I was just like, bruh, you hear Adon through the entire street. You could be doing, I could be buying some pomegranates, and it's just like you just hear Adon over a loudspeaker from the top of the, you know what I'm saying? I would be in bed in a hotel, and you hear the call to Adon. It's hard not to do that when you hear the call. It's like something that happens when you hear the call. It's like, okay, and they stop everything. I'll be in the middle of the souk, people busy as hell selling rugs and everything. You hear the Adon, everybody stops. They put the shade down. They doing this. They go and make salat. They make tea, and then they get back to business. Here it's like, bro, if I stop in the middle of a studio session and made salat, like, you know, most people that know me, they'll be like, okay, Chace praying, because I've done that before. But I'm saying most places in America, you just don't cater to it. So it's tough. That's part of why I wanted to get out of America at one point. I was like, man, I got to get somewhere where this is normalized more. Yeah. Well, I've been talking about the American government forever. I'm definitely on the list. All the lists. And name of my group was Self Scientific. We made songs called Pentagon Paradox, and we tripping. Ab is he's well read and has a lot of interest. I mean, me and Ab definitely from day one, for sure. I think Ab might, through Strong Arm Steady, a bunch of brothers I used to, make music with. I think he had an idea who was Self Scientific and, who I was. So certain things I think probably preceded me meeting him, but once we got to actually talk, it was off top. But I got a lot of brothers from Carson, like my brother Nael, Wendell Dumas and his family, they all from the Patch, and I've been knowing Raz since they was calling him Raisin, and he was dancing. We all came up together. But all them brothers, Bishop Lamont, all them, I've been knowing all them brothers a long time.